Hello YouTubers, got a new camera set up today, so see how that works. Anyway, we have as usual a few blogs. This one's very short. It's from 2019. It's called the Petri dish analogy, and here's how it goes. Society, bound by the vacuum of space, as the sides of the Petri dish, and God as the scientist. Thus humanity cannot escape the boundaries of its environment, both by design and direct control or intervention if need be. Moreover, the periodic collapse of civilizations, always at the very peak of their technological development, frustrating the designs of futurism, stems from the neglect of moral principles, which of course would never advocate for the technological development over the welfare of the environment, let alone the well-being of entire swathes of humanity. Of course, a Petri dish is something scientists use. If you do high school science, you get the experiment where you get the little Petri dish and you put some bacteria in it and you watch it grow, and at some point the food of the bacteria will run out, and then the bacteria will start to die. So the analogy here is that humanity can only ever progress so far. Of course, in the movies and in science fiction, they're gonna tell you there's a way to escape the vacuum of space that kind of borders our planet like a petri dish. But that's really just imagination and supposition. Unfortunately, the policies, political and educational and medical, that Western society uses to design its course, to map its course through the future, are all based on these suppositional ideas whose objective is to escape the petri dish walls and become like a spacefaring civilization or whatever. It's kind of ridiculous when you put it like that, but that's basically where Western society, people generally seem to think that's where it's progressing to. However, there is a discipline of science which examines the nature of societies, their sociological makeup, and the overall analysis. I think I remember reading of this discipline of science is that I think they said something like, in 100 years' time, humanity will be only 10% of what it is now. And basically what they're saying is that this petri dish effect will engage, whether by nuclear war as a consequence of lack of resources, or if you look at historically, feast and famine. There are times of plenty and times when resources and food is not plentiful. That happens in a regular cycle if you look through history. So I suppose they have all these things into their calculations. It's also observable if you do read through history, they're not going to exactly tell you this. I heard a historian talk about this, a world historian. It's kind of a new discipline, and he says that it is observable that that civilizations tend to exist in 400-year blocks. Basically you can see this very clearly, but they can't really talk about that because it wouldn't really be scientific, because this is more of it's almost like a biblical idea that civilizations get maximum of 400 years before they're kind of reset. The clock is reset, and that civilization or dynasty is destroyed. And this happens too, by the way, in both ancient Egyptian history and ancient Chinese. That you can still map these out into 400-year blocks. And of course, in the Bible, the Canaanites were given 400 years before, I think God says, they were ripened basically for punishment, consequences of their actions. And the Ottoman Empire, the other end, was 400 years. So you can see this quite clearly in history. And this is this Petri dish effect, I guess you could say. But you might want to consider what exactly are the mechanisms which cause societies to grow, peak, and then kind of collapse. Is it always a lack of resources like a Petri dish? Or is it like an outside force, like a cataclysm? It could happen at any point. Earthquakes, volcanoes, and in our society, a solar flare, or like mega earthquake. The Bible talks about an earthquake in the end of days that'll level every wall on earth. So you could imagine that resetting civilization back to the Middle Ages. And that could happen if these are the last days, and I think they are, then that might happen sometime in the next 40 years. And we might end up in a Middle Ages style civilization for the actual end of days prophecies to come into being. That's just my opinion, of course. But why would our civilization fail? What are the mechanisms that will cause our society to fail? Because it's easy to look back in history and say, well, the Roman Empire became corrupt, and it ran out of resources from Egypt, food. It overextended its military capacity. It wasn't able to satisfy its soldiers. At first they tried Christianity. Well, it was kind of paganism and Christianity blended together, because the Roman soldiers were becoming Christians because they could see the courage of the early Christians who were dying for their beliefs, I believe, and this inspired the Roman soldiers, to convert to Christianity, so that they could have courage. Because if you're ever in melee combat, and I trained for riot training when I was in the armed services, and it's quite terrifying. So these soldiers would have had to have a lot of courage to rush into battle and hand-to-hand combat. And you can read that in the Wars of the Jews by Josephus. He talks about how the Roman soldiers would build each other up with courage, and the commander would give inspiring speeches and all the rest, and they'd kind of hype themselves up into a frenzy before battle to give themselves the courage to rush forward in hand-to-hand combat. So they started taking on Christianity, and of course, my opinion is that the reason Constantine wanted Christianity to become the religion of Rome is so that he didn't lose control of his armies. Okay, so it's political, and in fact you can see that Roman Catholicism was more of a political system than a religion, and the methodologies of salvation in Roman Catholicism were not in any way related to the Bible or the New Testament, but they're very much related to traditional pagan religions. And Eusebius talks about that in his book. He says we are bringing in paganism to cover the Judaism, the Judaic aspects of early Christianity, proto-Christianity, or messianism, because the reality is they didn't want the way of the New Testament in Rome, because it's not a political system like Judaism. It's a way. It's for individuals to relate to God. You can't really translate that into a political theory. Okay, so Christianity, when it becomes political, is really no longer Christianity. It's no longer a messianic belief of being saved by the Messiah from the Old Testament so that you can personally relate to God and live your life in a godly way. That's not what Christianity is about. European Christianity was about control of populations, nothing to do with the New Testament. Okay, so that was the belief of the time. Before that, I think it's Aristotle, when he questioned the Greek pantheon, which was the underpinning system that society was built on, he had to take hemlock and die. I think it's Aristotle, might be another guy, because he was questioning the system that the theoretical ideas that ancient Greece was built on. Okay, and Rome too. You can see how they had to transition from paganism to Christianity to support their religion. But because they were pluralistic, they were able to do that. But once they had monotheistic Christianity, that they could no longer change. They had no other changes to make, and because it wasn't real faith, that their rulers were corrupt even under supposed nominal Christianity, and it didn't stop that civilization from collapsing. The consequence of all the evil things that Rome had done caught up with it, and that's this idea of this kind of karma or consequences, that God will punish societies for the way they treat other societies and the people within their societies. You can't have it in history, because that's not what history is about. It's about observing and recording historical events, not how those events or how the attitudes and behavior of a kingdom will have consequences in the future that could only be discerned by spiritual means. Alright, so you say God is punishing that society for doing evil, and that's why societies and civilizations don't last for more than 400 years. Obviously, you can't talk about that in history, even though it's observable that this actually happens. And the difference, there is a difference in this when you take Hitler or the Soviet Union, which directly confronts God's chosen people, Israel. And for Hitler you get 4 years instead of 400, and for the Soviet Union 70 years approximately. So that the time when your civilization gets less than 400 years is when you interrupt God's plan, his direct plans, which are being carried out on the earth since the time of Israel, through Israel. Before that, he would choose people such as Noah, and then of course Abraham, and then once it got to Jacob and God made the promise, the direct promise through Jacob, then history really started to take on a new meaning. Because if you were involved with Israel and you weren't blessing Israel, you're going to be cursed. God makes that very clear, and history bears that out. That's what's interesting, but you can't say that in history. So therefore the underpinnings of our modern society that we live in now are not religion. Okay, it's not some kind of religion like Christianity or pantheism, or we have all these gods like in Hinduism, and it's not Islam. It's not any of these things in Western society. It is what you might nominally call the religion of science, where you take scientific ideas, not even ideas, scientific observations, like that we exist in a solar system, in a galaxy, and as far as you can observe, and then you make up a story like the Big Bang, and you base the story of the Big Bang using terms that are used in describing the galaxy and the universe to make it sound scientific. But really, the idea of the Big Bang and the other theories about the spontaneous creation of the universe are mythological completely in nature, and the Big Bang is one of the ideas that underpins our society. So to question that would be the same as to question the pantheistic, the idolatrous religions of heathenism. Okay, you'd be punished by death. And in our day and age, in Western society, if you're a scientist and you question things like the Big Bang, you say, well, maybe God made it, then you are committing blasphemy against the modern idea. And what I'm proposing here is that these modern ideas like the Big Bang are part of the foundation of modern society, and they are therefore what will cause our society to collapse, because they're false, they're mythological. Another idea, of course, is evolution, created by Darwin, which is based on reincarnation and an ancient religion from Japan about the monkey god. It's a very famous character. If you ever watched the TV series Monkey Magic, this monkey god was the beginning of the human race. In other words, they believed thousands of years ago that human beings descended from monkeys. So Darwin took all these different mythological ideas from these religions that he encountered on his travels in the Beagle, his boat, and they coalesced in his mind into this idea of evolution. Of course, when he first proposed the idea, you can read this in his book on the origin of species, on the first edition, he suggested there were, I think, 37 original species created by God. He doesn't say created by God, but there were 37 existing, approximately 37, I don't remember exactly, and from there this evolution happened. Somehow this idea became more and more godless, because in those days it was acceptable to be a scientist and believe in God. So you could suggest that there was creation by God, but that was slowly eliminated over time. And this idea of evolution, using the jargon used in biology, the observational notations of biologists to describe what they see happening in nature, were then applied to this mythology of spontaneous creation and change, which is in no way backed up by science. It's a myth. And the reason this is a problem is because when you take a mythology like evolution and the Big Bang and others that exist in our modern society, and you base political, sociological and educational ideas on them, and then you apply these ideas to your societies, because you're basically applying mythology onto real-time human beings and their lives, you're going to get a massive disaster in exactly the same way as you would if you take some people out in the bush or the jungle and you give them a map from a toy game, and you say, you're going to take this map and you're going to navigate through the jungle. But because it's an imaginary map, you might get some of the cleverer people in the group looking at the map and say, well, that kind of looks like this and that kind of looks like that mountain or stream, and they can kind of navigate along. And this is what evolution does, and scientific theories and psychology. Psychology is pure Eastern religion. It's not even trying to hide what it is. And then you base your lives and the lives of your society on that. It's going to continuously run into all sorts of disasters that we see in our modern society. Moral bankruptcy, right? There's no reason for people to do what's right without the idea of God watching you. And of course humanists say, no, that's rubbish. But that's human nature. But of course science denies human nature. The Bible says human nature, humans have evil thoughts since their youth, and society bears that out. Well, this is what prisons and criminals and corruption means. Okay, it's observational. You can observe that human beings are corrupt, fallen creatures. But when you deny this through humanism and say, basically everyone's just good, You're denying reality that everyone can see and experience for themselves. And then you say, let's navigate with these mythological ideas. You may be able to travel so far through the future until you meet something like another society, an aggressive society that wants to make war, or a cataclysm, or a loss of resources, or the application of an idea that causes a great deal of harm to your society, whether it's through education or some sort of, how can I put this without getting censored, an intervention onto your population, which you think, according to the mythologies that you believe in, will help them and make them stronger and healthier, but will have the exact opposite effect, because it's all myths, it's all mythology. There's no observational science behind any of the ideas that are being used to direct civilization, Western civilization. Okay. You could say we're about, depending on how you measure it, we're either 3/4 through the 400 years of Western civilization, modern Western civilization, or, you got about 50 years to go. I personally think we've got about 50 years before that 400-year period ends. Bearing in mind, the 400 years isn't exact in the Bible. You can break the Bible down into 400-year periods, and if you do that in 50 years, it'll be approximately 6,000 years. So a lot of, there's a belief that does exist where the entire history of the world will be 7,000 years. And the last 1,000 years is the reign of the Messiah. So if this is the end of the 6,000 years, then this is the end of all those epochs. It's all coming to an end now in our civilization. So literally we could be, second to last, or the last few generations on Earth. And I believe that actually is a reason for great hope. Because if that's true, and God is just, and He is just, then He's going to give more and more opportunities for people to turn away from this system that cannot work, this mythological system, just like all the other systems that went before. They're all based on false religions, on idol worship, and many gods, or things that just aren't true, and that we can easily see now looking back at their scriptures. Okay, you can do that for every scripture except for the Bible. That's a fact. They don't work out because they weren't real, but they applied them as if they were real, and those societies, of course, failed through a lot of reasons. Our society is doing the same thing on its religion of, science, of pseudoscience. I can say it. And the reason there's hope in that is because in these last days, God is going to give people a lot of opportunities to turn away from that and believe in Him, have faith in the Bible. And the reason you can do that is because being a Christian, being a born-again believer, gives you the opportunity not to go into a group and chant and perform rituals and feel like you're part of a group and get that nice feeling of being a part of a group, part of something organized and structured that seems cohesive and coherent in a kind of chaotic world. This is not what being a born-again Christian is about. Being a born-again Christian is about experiencing your faith by experiencing the Lord God, because through the blood of the sacrifice of the Messiah, Yeshua, you can be brought into the Holy of Holies, which is why the curtain was rent. If you read the New Testament, the curtain from the Holy of Holies was torn, because now as believers we become the temple of God, and God indwells us, and you can come into His presence and experience the peace and the power of God in your life. And then the idea is that's going to flow out and affect the people around you and affect your perspective on life. Okay, so when things are difficult, you have an opportunity to turn to God and to either have peace in that chaotic situation, or sometimes even for God to intervene somehow. And a lot of born-again believers can tell you how God can miraculously do that. So this is an experience of faith. It's not going to change anything in your society. Society's still going to fail. Okay? You're not going to be able to rescue your society from destruction. You can certainly tell whoever is around you, and they as individuals and their families can be saved. And we're talking about salvation of their souls here, and to have peace in the chaos of whatever is happening around you. So while there's no escape from the reality of the rise and fall of civilizations, individuals and families can be saved and have peace, and sometimes even escape the destruction of civilizations. Like Yeshua predicted the end of that particular civilization of Israel. Okay, that was the 400-year block that came to an end at Masada in approximately in 73 CE. He predicted that, and he said to the believers at the time, you need to escape. And the ones that listened, of course, survived. So there is that. Okay, so that's about enough for this one. And I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time.